Do you think one mind is better than many? Neither do we. A University of Chicago Booth School of Business MBA is for curious and collaborative people who value different perspectives and ideas. Chicago Booth takes pride in empowering and being empowered by women of diverse backgrounds. We believe that fostering an inclusive community creates an environment of analytical, open-minded inquiry and produces knowledge with enduring impact. Learn more today at chicagobooth.edu/elevate. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Ellevate podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we have for you Maricella's final interview that she did before she left. From here, it's going to go into my interviews, and then you're going to get some of Margie's interviews. Really exciting announcement. Margie Sullivan, our interim CEO, she's been doing a bunch of interviews. Hers will come out in a few months. Really excited about that. Cannot wait for you guys to get to start hearing those. I do also want to let you guys know that this is actually the last episode of the podcast that will be released during my tenure at Ellevate Network. I have had an incredible run at Ellevate. I have loved every single second of my job at Ellevate. It has been truly incredible getting to work with this incredible community. I don't really have words for it. It's not a sad occasion. I have another opportunity that I'm really, really excited for. And everybody at Ellevate has been so supportive. And don't worry, you still have actually a bunch of my interviews left. And then, of course, you'll have plenty of Margie's interviews coming in. There will be some fun things. You might get to see some video interviews in the future. You will still get to hear my voice for the next bunch of weeks because I'm pre-recording all of our intros for our speakers. So you will still get to hear my voice for quite some time. And because we schedule a lot of these out way far in advance. But I just wanted to tell you that. So this week is with Sofia B, Pertuz, who is a DEI professional and certified executive coach with over 25 years of experience serving higher education, nonprofit, and corporate organizations. She's a speaker and workshop facilitator for international audiences on topics in leadership, equity and mental health, social justice, and LGBTQ advocacy, and has delivered keynotes in both English and Spanish. She is also the host of our Hispanic, Latina, Latinx community circle every month. So definitely be sure to listen to this one if you're curious about that community circle, or otherwise just come on by. If you're a member of that community, definitely be sure to sign up for that. You'll get to meet Sofia. You'll get to see so many other members of our Ellevate community. It's just an amazing space. So let's go ahead and get to her interview now.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with Sofia Pertuz. So excited to be here with you, Sofia. I'm always really happy to talk to you, both in our community circle for Latina professionals and any other chance. So I'm really excited that our audience gets to hear you this time around.
I'm excited to be a part of this. So let's get started.
How about we start with you telling our audience a little bit about what you do, and more importantly, what brought you to doing what you do?
Okay. Well, my role is I'm currently the managing director for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Billie Jean King Enterprises. And previous to that, I was also a founder for my own consulting business and executive coaching business, Mainstream Insight LLC. What brought me to where I am now, I mean, it's a long career of first 25 years in higher education. I did all the higher ed, student-facing positions. My last role was Associate Vice President and Dean of Students at Hofstra University on Long Island. I had lived literally and worked on several different campuses, trying to create communities where students and faculty and staff can thrive. And I did all the degrees, my bachelor's, then my master's, a PhD in higher education, management, leadership, and policy. So I thought that was going to be my life. Like my career trajectory in my mind was, okay, once I'm associate vice president and dean of students, my next role is going to be VP and probably president at some point. As a matter of fact, my mom used to ask me, why aren't you president yet? This is a Dominican, barely went to school, maybe made it to fifth grade and is asking me when I'm going to be president. So, and I would ask that it to myself. But in 2018, I took a bit of a pivot and was recruited by the JED Foundation, a nonprofit that protects the emotional health and prevents suicide for young people. And it was a really cool opportunity to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion for a nonprofit that was very tied, connected, and very embedded on many different campuses. So it was an opportunity to not just work on one campus, but work on many. And that was before the pandemic when I made that transition. And it was not an easy one, but I did. And then during the pandemic, it was, as you know, a really big moment of just discernment, reckoning. That's around the time I started my business, because a lot of folks who were trying to figure out what they were going to do with their diversity and inclusion efforts were reaching out to me because they knew that that was work that I was doing, training and consulting. Anyway, so I ended up being recruited again during 2021 to the Billie Jean King Enterprises team. So I've made many, and now it's corporate, so it's not a nonprofit, although they do have a couple of nonprofit arms. I work for the corporate side of things, working with clients on their DEI, change management, and event strategies. So that's what brought me here. I could probably tell you so much more, but you know,
don't worry, I will be asking.
I also teach. I teach research methods 1 and 2 at Glasgow, Caledonian, New York College. So that's a newer opportunity that it has been really cool and exciting, because I've always had a passion for higher education, research, and I get to work with students who are working on their fashion and sustainability, business and sustainability, and DEI. So that's just a whole new thing. Like it brings me back to my roots of higher education.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't know you were teaching, and it makes so much sense.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but throughout my higher ed career, I think it's part of higher ed that at some point you're either an adjunct faculty member if you're working as a campus administrator. Sometimes you get the opportunity to teach also. So I've already done that before.
So I have a bunch of questions. I really did write a bunch of things on my notes, but I actually want to take 3 steps back, because whenever we do our Latina community circle, you talk a little bit about your upbringing, and you mentioned your mom very briefly right now as you were talking about your career journey. Can you share a little bit of that, kind of like, I don't know, I feel like people who go into DEI, who do these works that are very mission driven, there's a drive, and I would put myself in that bucket too, that I think comes from a lot of how we grew up, or how, you know, what we were surrounded by and the people we were surrounded by in our family. And I'd love for you to share a little bit with our audience.
Sure. I was born in Dominican Republic, and I was brought here to the Bronx. That's where I grew up when I was a baby. So I don't remember living in Dominican Republic, because I was barely one when I came. And my mom and my dad, they both grew up in the Dominican Republic with very modest means. So coming here was opportunity for them. My father was a cab driver. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she was, now that I think about it, I used to say, oh, I'm a first-gen entrepreneur. And that's not true. I'm second generation, because my mom used to sell Avon, Tupperware, Coppersmith, if people remember that. She used to buy garments downtown near Broadway Lafayette and sell them to our neighborhood folks. So my mom was a really big influence in my life, because she was always, there's always a way. Her mentality was, there's always a way. So having the perspective of, and I grew up, even when we were here, we were better off than our family in Dominican Republic. That I knew when I would go back and visit and see how my family in Dominican Republic lived with very modest means. To live here, I lived in the projects in the Bronx, and I look back and I didn't think I was poor the way people would describe anyone who's from the projects. I don't even like that term. But I grew up in a place where people would be like, wow, really? You didn't have enough? I'm like, we had plenty. We had plenty of love, plenty of encouragement. So my family and my mom especially were always encouraging us to go to school. I guess that's why I am such a high achiever. A few things I didn't mention is I hold all these different degrees, but I also have all these certifications that along the way, like I'm a lifelong learner. So I went for my Society for Human Resource Senior Certified Professional, diversity certifications. I also have I'm an executive coach, so I have the certification for that. So my mom valued always learning, always being better, always trying to, I guess, that hustle. And I don't necessarily love the word hustle, but I guess that's the word that comes to mind when I think of, we never needed anything because my mom took care of it and made sure she figured it out, whatever it was. So my drive comes from her always figuring it out. And both my parents have passed by now. So they leave a true legacy of, me and my siblings. There's 5 of us that grew up together. Everyone is a high achiever. Everyone works really hard. And actually 2 of us now have doctorates. One is working on one. Another one is, she got her certifications as a teacher and then as an administrator and as an assistant principal. My brother has all kinds of certifications in computer science and computer engineering. So like my family is just really impressive, and my parents are very proud of all of us.
I love that. And I think and that's what I wanted to get to, like that drive that you get from where you come from. Like my mom did not go to college, and for her, to me, it was always like, you have to go to college, you have to get your degree, you have to do all these things. And like, she was the one pushing me to do all these things. So like you said at the beginning, this woman who didn't do all of this is pushing me to be vice president. It's pushing me to be, all these things. And I think that drive is, God, I couldn't be more thankful. And I think you're kind of in the same boat.
Yeah. I mean, the other side of it is, while it was all positive too, the encouragement and, you can be whatever you want to be, no matter what. I think my other drive is some of the ways we were treated. We grew up, with food stamps and with public assistance. And I remember going with my mom to translate for her, to apply for different benefits, and the way she was treated and talked down to, as if, you do not deserve this. You shouldn't even be here. I remember how that felt. And I always wanted to make sure that I had a life that I didn't have to depend on anyone, and that whatever I was going to earn, it was going to be because of my hard work and dedication. So being treated like that was definitely one perspective. The other one is, I'm Dominican. I grew up in the Bronx in a neighborhood where most of the families, we were Dominican, and we were one of the few Dominican families. Most of the families were Puerto Rican and Black African American, and anyone white was usually, our teachers, firefighters, police officers, people in official positions. So I remember just being in a space where people were constantly asking me and my siblings, like, what are you and who are you? So because we didn't look like everybody else. So I think my drive for diversity and inclusion is like wanting everyone to be able to go to spaces and never be asked, who are you? What are you? It's just like, you belong because you're just here.
That is so powerful. And thank you for sharing that. And we talk about this in the community circle too, because in the Latino community, we're all so different. Right? Like,
right. We have a variety.
Right. And it's not understood that easily by people who are not part of the community.
No, I think everyone lumps everyone the same and says, well, if you're Latinx or Hispanic or whatever label, we go through all these different ideas about the labels. Somehow we're all exactly the same. But I don't think anyone would ever say, oh, Scotland and England and Ireland, they're all the same because they're right there next to each other. If you talk to people from those countries, they'd be like, no, they're not the same. They're different cultures, different upbringing, different heritage and history, right?
Completely. Yeah. But I think every chance we can get to like talk about how we're different, it's also good. It's a good reminder and like learning moment for other people to be like, oh, yeah, it's not, we're all individuals. And like you said, you should not be asked, who are you or what are you? You should just belong.
Right. And I love talking about my heritage. That's not an issue for me. I just don't want me being Latina to get in the way of people giving me opportunities or working with me in some way, or just giving me the credibility. That shouldn't be connected at all. And I know I have had moments when I felt like someone was saying something like, oh, the Latina dean. And I'm like, no. I'm just the dean of students that happens to be Latina. It's just part of who I am. It's not all of who I am.
So going down this route, so we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and all of these terms that sometimes almost feel like fads, if you know what I mean. Like, and I'm being a little bit facetious about it because I also believe in them. But what are you've been in the space for a long time. How are the challenges shifting?
Exactly how you started the question with, all the different terms, the diversity, inclusion, belonging. You recently, I was having a conversation with a group that's one of our clients, and the conversation was around, should we be updating our terminology? Because if we use equality and other people are using equity, if we use belonging and other people are using inclusion, like, which is the right one? And I'm thinking to myself, can we focus on the work, the actual issues
Mm-hmm.
at hand that are problematic? So, for example, if you're a company that is your senior leadership does not represent the rest of your company, or your senior leadership does not represent the communities you're serving, and you notice I'm not using any words, any labels right now. We're just talking
Mm-hmm.
about opportunity, advancement, and leadership. If you can't take a really good look at your structure and your leadership and whose voices are not at the table, then let's not talk about the labels. Let's talk about what's actually happening and what actions you need to take to make sure you're creating succession planning that includes making sure you have a pathway for people to advance within the same company. Because I think most people, as much as people say, oh, these days nobody stays at any company long, I think most people would if they knew that there was an opportunity for advancement within that company. So I
Yep.
think when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I don't think it's just about representation. I think part of it is that. But then once you get the representation down and you did the recruiting, because I get that question too. Oh, how do we recruit more people from underrepresented groups? I'm like, okay, you just want to recruit them or you want to keep them? Which one? Because you can do both,
Don't.
but you need to think about what's the end goal here. Are you looking to include people once they get there and create a space where they can actually contribute? Or do you just want them to show up and add some literal color or, add something new? And then, when they don't feel comfortable, you blame it back on them. Like, well, you didn't fit in. So there you go.
Yeah, that idea of we hear it at Ellevate, like, oh, but there are no women. I'm like, what do you mean?
That's
They leave because there's no pathway. Like the words you use, right? Pathway for what's next. Where are you gonna go?
right. Exactly. Or you have a certain look of who you think, I've been part of
Mhm.
organizations where I would see senior leadership and I'm like, I don't look like any of them. Will they ever see me as someone who can take over their role? Or would they be in their succession planning thinking, oh, it needs to be someone that looks just like me? Because if that's the thinking,
Mhm.
you're never going to diversify your senior
Yeah,
leadership.
yeah. I have a question that I've never asked you actually, but knowing that you've worked in DEIB, in academia, in nonprofits, in corporate, how is it different, or is it?
Oh, very different. Very interesting that you should ask. So because I was in higher ed for 25 years, there are certain ethos or values that come from higher ed, and some of it is the idea of evidence based. There's nothing that you should be doing or saying that doesn't have some kind of research behind it or proof that it's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of concepts that I remember from higher education that were a given, that you would go walk into space and you would never do a DEI training that you have to show kind of like your rationale behind what you're doing. You have to bring people in to feel like they're connected to it. And there's activities that you do that are very touchy feely too, that
Mm-hmm.
that get people connected from a intellectual, but also from a heart and mind kind of place. I think the difference, nonprofit is similar in that way because it is
Mm-hmm.
mission driven, and both higher ed and nonprofits are very much mission driven. I would say corporate, it's hit or miss. I think they want to be mission driven, and once they put some things in writing that are their values, their mission, their I guess their goals, it's a lot less connected in terms of the heart and mind. You really have to focus more on the business case for some, where
Yeah.
you show like, how is this impacting the bottom line? And I think there are things that I am now bringing back from my higher ed time that for me were basic concepts, but they were advanced for they were basic for higher ed, but they're actually pretty advanced for corporate, because in corporate, many folks that I interact with have not done too much diversity and inclusion work, where in higher ed, that was a given. It's part of your onboarding. It's very much embedded in a lot of the way that we do things in higher education. So no, it's just different. I wouldn't say like one is better than the other, because I think there's stuff that happens in business that I wish in higher ed we had done, like really looking at the bottom line and how does this impact the way that we are meeting our financial goals in addition to our belongingness goals, because there's a lot of higher ed institutions in trouble because they're not meeting enrollment, or some of the ways their teams are connecting is not the way that they would hope. So they're losing staff. So there's a lot of like bottom line stuff happening in higher ed now that I think if they functioned a little more like business, it would have helped. So I don't know. At the end of the day, we're all people. I think everyone's doing the best they can and just trying to figure out how to keep their teams happy, but also get hard work from their folks.
You're a better person than I am, because I don't know if everyone's doing their best.
I agree. I mean, I don't think I would do diversity and inclusion work if I didn't have some kind of like hope that everyone is at least trying, because otherwise I would just give up and be like, you know what, I'm going to go do something else. I don't know what that would be, but something else, not this.
Yeah. I'm curious because you said, there's some stuff that was basic on the academia side that now you're bringing back to corporate. Can you share some of that? I'm very curious what that could be.
Yeah. I think when I first entered some corporate spaces with the way I was thinking about DEI training, I really focused first on the business case and really trying to bring in statistics and help people understand from an intellectual perspective, why is it important to make sure that representation is happening in the way that you are, hoping for, that you're creating spaces where everyone can thrive. And that means, infusing psychological safety, teaching managers how to be better, empathetic leaders. I feel like in higher ed, we were doing a lot of touchy-feely stuff like awareness exercises, things that make you think about, like, when was the first time you ever encountered someone different than yourself? And I remember doing exercises like that with resident assistants or other student leader training, because we were trying to help them understand that their words and actions make an impact on the people that they're going to interact with day to day. And I'm not saying that that's not something we did all the time in corporate, but I'm finding I'm going back to the basics of just that human interaction training, where you really put yourself, you get some self-awareness happening first before you can even encounter how does it impact everyone else. So I think that's, for me, was basic. That idea of, in my framework of the way that I think about DEI is, you cannot consider how you impact others until you figure out what your own issues are. What are your own biases? Where do they come from? What messages did you get when you were growing up about people different than you? Because if you have biases that live in you that you don't even realize, there's no way you're going to be able to supervise people different than yourself, because you've already got in your mind, I guess, a certain mindset around how people function or not. So I think that's hard. If you don't recognize those and you don't admit them, you can't supervise someone like me. Like a white person supervising a woman of color might say and do things that they don't even realize they're saying or doing them. But if we can come to a place of, you know what, I might say something offensive, or I might say something that might be hurtful, or not recognize you, that you could have that enough awareness to say, you know what, if I'm not getting it right, work with me, tell me, please, because my first value is to make sure that you're gonna feel that I trust you, that I want you to succeed, and that's my first value. But if anything happens along the way that makes you not feel that, let me know.
It's interesting. You're really talking about psychological safety and trust building, which is true. I think that in some places, more nonprofit, more on the mission-driven side, we lead with that, with people, right?
Right.
And
yep.
and in some places, particularly when you're talking about larger companies, that individuality or that people focus lessens, unfortunately.
I think so. I agree. And that's why, like, that's, to me, it's the back to basics, back to that idea of like, what am I bringing back from higher ed that I'm using in corporate? It's the, when you're working on a college campus, people are together 24/7 sometimes, especially if they live on campus. We make assumptions about work. Oh, no, this is just temporary. We're just working together. So we're not really in each other's lives. And that is not true. We spend so much time at work and with our coworkers, or at least thinking about them in the, with the projects we work on, that to have the illusion that you're not needing to connect with them on a more personal level is almost like complete denial, and not acknowledging the place that personal touch goes into being a good manager, a good boss, a good leader.
Kind of jumping off from that, in a college campus, you're all together. This is even harder now in corporate when you're remote. How do you bring that humanness to this environment that we're dealing with?
Into the remote and hybrid, I would say that even if you have no reason to connect with each other, figure out ways to stay connected, whether it's a weekly coffee or during team meetings, add a question at the beginning that everyone can answer. So, for example, in the class I teach, I start the class with a random question. So like the question this week was, what was the strangest thing you saw this week? and it just gets people thinking, laughing. Another question I had was, what was the best thing you ate this week?
Ooh.
So they're not that personal. I mean, you can choose not to share, but what I find is that even just starting a meeting or any kind of setting with something a little personal, it opens up the door for so much more sharing. And I find that the interaction gets better. So I think in the workplace, if you can just ask each other how things are going, what's new for you, what's the hardest thing you're dealing with right now at work and at home, so that people can feel like you care about me as a human being. Because people don't leave jobs because they don't like the job. They leave because they don't feel cared for, and they feel, I would say, even I've been thinking a lot about professional neglect, which I think is what happens when remote workers just feel like they're out there, like they're doing their work, they're producing, but nobody cares, or like they feel like nobody cares. So I would say one of the biggest problems we have right now, and I should write about this, is the idea of professional neglect. I really feel like that's the biggest problem plaguing a lot of our employees right now, and the way that remote and hybrid work is impacting people negatively and causing major psychological, mental health concerns.
I've never thought about that term, but I think you definitely should write about that. Who do you think is responsible for not being neglectful?
Oh gosh, this was a hard one, but easy at the same time. The person running the company. I mean, honestly, it's the people with the most power, whether they want to admit it or not, have the biggest responsibility when it comes to preventing anybody feeling disconnected.
Yeah, but then you think about it, and they can't, and especially in a large environment, the person at the top can't necessarily be there and connecting to the thousands and thousands of people in an organization. They certainly have the responsibility of setting the tone.
However, what I think they can do is they can create systems and structures to help with that, and they can leave room for others that are just as powerful, or at least give up some of the power so that others can take it on and say, you know what, I think we should do, icebreakers at the beginning of each staff meeting. Oh, okay, like take the suggestion and go, great, let's do it, instead of going, we don't have time for that. Because I've heard of, some senior leaders who say, no, we're down to business, we can't do that. And meanwhile, they have a newer employee who says, hey, it would be nice if we did this. And they have suggestions, but they won't listen to them. So
I love that.
So I totally get it. I don't think every leader, like when I was the AVP and Dean of Students, I had a really large operation where, I had hundreds of employees that were working in my area. And there were moments when people would say to me, like, how do you keep track of what's going on with everybody? You seem to like really be in tune with what's going on with even some of the student staff. And I said, well, part of my one-on-ones with my team is, can tell me who's got anything going on that I need to know. Like, what's standing out to you? Is there anything that is holding anyone back from doing what they're supposed to do? Right? Because at the end of the day, I want everybody to do their job, right? But I also asked questions during my team meetings about people so that they understand that that's a high value for me.
Yeah.
So I get it. I understand that you can't know everything, but you can try to create an environment amongst your team that frees them up to do what they're supposed to do, to care about people too.
Yeah, I think that's very important. You said a couple of things, like give up some of the power for people who have ideas on how to do this, which I think is fantastic. And it's a really good way to put it. Like, give up some of that power. If you are the person up at the top, like, bring others who can help to support this. And then the other thing that I think was very salient of what you said is you couldn't meet all the people, but you would ask. So when you had one-on-ones with your direct reports, they knew you were caring and they knew you were interested in the rest of the people. They knew that that was important to you. And then they can bring that down to their level with their direct reports. And then they can bring that down to their direct reports and so forth. So it does start with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It does start with the leaders. And, even leaders sometimes need encouragement. They need to be asked, are you okay? How are you doing? So this is when I put it back on employees to do it the other way around and check in on your CEOs, check in on your VPs, check in on your senior leaders to say, are you okay? What can I do to help you? Is there anything I need to do to support you better in the way that what are you worried about that I can help with?
That's a really interesting point because we never talk about that.
No. And everyone's so critical, and being at the top is hard, and being in leadership positions. I remember going to a presentation once where someone talked about the concept of leadership oppression, because leaders are always on the like most critical list for everybody, right? Like, oh, they're not doing this right. They're not doing that right. But they never get the support sometimes from the people who are just assuming that all this stuff's going on for them. And it's like, no, sometimes you just need to ask them, or like give them grace and leave room for the human side for leaders also. I wish we did that more.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. And, it's interesting because it's true. Everyone says, it's lonely at the top, and it is. And it doesn't need to be.
No, it doesn't. And it doesn't need to be that you have to rely on others in similar positions to you. I think that's great and that's perfect, because that's why networks like this exist, right? So that senior women leaders can find each other and commiserate with each other. But I still think you can find that connection with all levels of employees if you leave room for that.
So I think what we're talking about is about connection. And you're very much, like I mentioned before, you lead the Ellevate Latinx community circle. You are part of many groups. You're involved in this very, human realm, DEIB. How do you think about the power of connection?
I don't think any of us can do anything without it. So Margaret Mead says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And to me, I love that saying, because I think none of us does anything alone. I think a lot of people think they do it alone. I went to a presentation the other day where there was a male venture capitalist who was talking about all the different things he does. And then someone asked him, like, how do you do that? How do you do it all? And usually women are the ones, right, that get that question of like, how do you get it done? How do you get it done? And men never get that question. So it was awesome to see him be asked that. And he went down this whole list of, I have a virtual assistant that does this. I have a nutritionist that does that. I have several nannies that come and help take care of the children. I have he made this list of all these helpers in his life that make it easier to do all the different things that he does. And I was like, we never talk about what are those support networks that we have. And sometimes our communities are part of that network of support that give us an idea on how to do something different, help you rethink something, ask you a hard question that you're like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Oh, okay. Thank you for asking me now. Now it's not so bad when I put it in perspective. So I think community is worth everything when it comes to listening to different perspectives from different people.
And yet, and I agree with you. I work at Ellevate. Clearly, I believe in the power of connections. And it's interesting because one of the things you said was, that different perspectives. But there's also something to be said for people who you have that connection with, or groups where you you have a little bit of an understanding.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, every place I've worked, interestingly, most of the places I've worked were all predominantly white spaces, and especially with senior leadership. Very few senior leaders that looked like me. As a matter of fact, I was the only Latina dean at my institution when I was in that role. Um, and at every place I worked, now that I think about it, a group of us women of color would find each other somehow, connect, and we even had a name at every single place I worked. There was the ladies who lunch. Another place it was the sanity check crew. Another place, I know we all had all these labels, and I'm still in touch with all these little groups, right? And one of them was like the divas brunch crew. Whatever it
Love
was that made us feel like we were not alone, we would actually go off site and have lunches. And as you can, it's called ladies who lunch. We would go have lunches or dinners and just like commiserate a bit, but also help strategize on how to navigate these spaces that just seem to work against us sometimes. So that community was really, I don't think I would have survived some of the places where I worked without those connections.
Yeah, you need both. You need the different perspectives, broader group of people who can shine the light on things you've never thought about. And you need the close group that you can also shine a light on things that, we're going through it together. And
Absolutely.
there is an understanding. I mean, I was thinking of how when we jumped on this call and we still weren't recording, and I was explaining to you, like, it's very conversational, blah, 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 which I always do with our guests. But with you, I did something I've never done, which was say, it's like we're having a cafecito. And I knew you were going to understand.
Yeah, like and that's the back to the, there's differences. You're from a different country, Latin country, than I am, and yet there are some commonalities that when you say cafecito, it's like we're gonna have a moment of just sharing authentically and honestly, and you don't even have to explain it, so there is a shortcut there.
Yeah, it was funny. I'd never actually done that, and as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah.
True.
Well, thank you for being here. This has been great.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it this time.
Well, we're going to go into our lightning round, so I hope you're ready.
Okay, I think so. We'll see.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
No.
We're going to agree to disagree on that one.
Okay.
If you could time travel, where is the first place you would go?
I would go to my mother's childhood home because I've only seen, I've seen it live, and it's so tiny. And I'm curious to know how my mom lived there with her 12 siblings. It's so small, but yet it was so much love. So I'd love to go there.
Oh, I like that. Would you rather explore outer space or the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, outer space for sure, because I can't swim that well.
Yeah, I'd be freaked out with the bottom of the ocean for some reason. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Knowing what other people are thinking.
You are a brave woman. I don't know if I want to know that.
No, honestly, I think what I would discover probably is like, nobody's thinking about you. So just stop. You're always wondering like, oh, did they not like what I said? Did you not? I ruminate a lot at the end of the day. And I'm like, you know what? You're the only one thinking about that person. They don't even think about you. So I would love to know that for confirmation.
I had never thought about that in that way. So you just like blew my mind.
It's a stoic thing. I'm a stoic philosopher. So I read a lot of stoic stuff about, getting out of your own way because you think everyone else is thinking about you. And it's like, nope, they're not. So just do your thing. Don't worry about it.
I like that. Which brings me to a favorite recent read.
Favorite recent read. Oh, I just listened to Selma Blair's memoir. I listened to a lot of books, and it was just really great to hear her journey and her now, the clues she had along her life when she now knows that she has MS, multiple
Mm-hmm.
sclerosis, and there were signs along the way early in her life. So it made me just think about like what signs am I needing to watch for me and my health to make sure that I'm taking care of myself.
I've been going down a tear of wanting to read or listen to more memoirs, so I'll check hers out. Most used app on your phone?
The calendar.
I've never actually had anyone say that, which is
I
very
love
surprising.
I love looking at my calendar so that I know what's coming. I know what I can delete, add. There's something just about trying to control time that makes me feel safe.
Never
Even though
heard that one.
it's not true. You cannot control time, but the calendar makes me feel grounded.
I like it. I like it. I'm going to ask you this one. What sport would you compete in if you were in the Olympics?
Oh, pickleball. It's not in the Olympics yet, but I feel like if it ever did, maybe I'll train and there'd be something I'm good at. I like pickleball.
I've never played pickleball.
It's so fun.
I've heard, yeah. Best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Leave everything better than you found it. I think, about that with people, not just things. So I remember hearing that for the first time and saying, that makes sense. Yeah, like always try to do better and make sure everyone around you is better.
I really like that. And finally, what's one thought you'd want to leave with our listeners?
One thought is if you have a goal in mind, something you want to accomplish, get started no matter how long you think it's going to take and how far away it seems. Time has to pass anyway, so you may as well get started chipping away at your goal. I know so many people who finished doctorates, got a certification, got to a physical goal that they wanted to get to, and they just started one day at a time. And sure enough, you look up and you're like, wow, how did 5 years go by? And I got it done. So sometimes it just feels daunting, but just start with something.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been so great, Maricela. I'm so enjoying this conversation. I'm sad that it sounds like you're ending it, but we gotta get on with other things in our lives, right? I gotta go look at my calendar.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you liked that interview as much as I did. That was so much fun. Let's go straight into our history makers. This week, Deborah Kawahara became the first Asian American woman president of the American Psychological Association. Anira Cano became the first Latina board chair of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberties. Speaking of that committee, Sophie Herscher-Andorsky became the first Jewish vice chair of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberties. Julia Arata Frada became Fitchburg, Wisconsin's first Latina mayor. Aditi Ashok became the first Indian woman golfer to win a medal at the Asian Games. And I would be remiss if my final history maker was not this one. I want to give a shout out to the incredible team of Simone Biles, Shilese Jones, Sky Blakely, Leanne Wong, Jocelyn Roberson, and Kayla DiCello, who became the first team to win 7 consecutive World Gymnastics Championships team titles. Congratulations, go Team USA, go all of those other teams. I have the deepest love for all of the teams that are competing. Let's go in Paris. I cannot wait to see what happens there. But next week, you will get to hear one of my interviews. Again, don't worry, you'll still be hearing my voice plenty in my interviews as well as my intros. But let's go ahead and give you a little sneak peek because I'm really actually very excited. This was one where a little behind the scenes, her submission came in while we were on a hiatus with recording podcasts. That's why if you notice, if anything we mentioned is a little out of date, this happened several months ago. However, when the submission came in, I was like, I literally cannot say no because that is absolutely 100%. So next week, I'm going to be talking to Eden Bridgman, who's the CEO of Ebony Media Group. For more than 75 years, Ebony has served as a voice for the Black experience and a beacon of hope for culture and communities worldwide. However, after struggling to maintain its dominance in the changing landscape of print magazines and social media, Ebony was on the verge of bankruptcy until in 2020, Eden and her family recognized the importance and heritage of the brand and decided to purchase it and give it new life. Since the Bridgmans' takeover, The Ebony Renaissance has been rooted in a digital-first strategy, and Eden is creating a new business model for the Ebony brand, which allows it to continue to be the most influential Black-owned media company in the world, while maintaining its purpose of celebrating, highlighting, and sharing Black stories. So I will see you back next week when I interview Eden. See you then. Ellevate Network drives real results for ambitious women trying to break through the glass ceiling and achieve success in their careers. We offer a platform full of resources and opportunities for growth, all designed to help you unlock your potential. With Ellevate support, you can take the first step toward achieving your professional goals. With a supportive community and tangible resources at your fingertips, you're only one step away from reaching your fullest potential. Join us today and take advantage of our 30-day free trial to start building the career of your dreams. Thanks so much for listening to the Ellevate podcast. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, give us 5 stars, and share your review. You can learn all about Ellevate membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Katherine Heller. She rocks. Thanks so much, and join us next week.